Robin Williams, world-famous comedian and movie star, died on August 11, 2014 at the age of just 63. Robin hung himself in an act that left the world both grief-stricken and confused. How could this man, who was known internationally for his wit, his sense of humour, his characters, and his ability to make others laugh, take his own life? What could possibly have led him to this final act of desperation, leaving behind a wife and 3 children? Subsequently, we came to learn that Robin was suffering from a form of dementia called Lewy Body dementia. He had previously been given the incorrect diagnosis of Parkinsons Disease. Now, the reason I want to tell you about Robin Williams in this video is because here is a man who many might think had it all: money, fame, personality, intelligence, creativity, influence, family. And yet dementia didn't discriminate, and dementia never discriminates. Robin and his family succumbed to the same battles and hardships of any one of us battling a dementia diagnosis or misdiagnosis. Those who view my videos regularly will know I'm always talking about the importance of a correct diagnosis. If something doesn't seem to fit, then get a second opinion. The experts aren't really experts in your life at all. You are. So always trust your instinct and don't be afraid to say, I want another opinion. Too many times we get it wrong. Would Robin have survived if given a correct diagnosis and the right treatment? Well, I guess that's hard to say. Lewy Body dementia is a terminal diagnosis. Like many dementias, it isn't going to get better, but there may have been an opportunity for him to get the right sort of help. Robin was not given a Lewy Body diagnosis until his autopsy, where it was revealed he had diffuse Lewy proteins throughout his entire brain. His symptoms started not long after his marriage to Susan in October 2011. And about 2 to 3 years prior to his suicide. Dementia starts insidiously and the symptoms emerge slowly, and this can make it hard for people to detect exactly when things started to change. Often the person has had the dementia for some time before the symptoms begin. Susan, his wife, reported that Robin started displaying unusual behaviours in a number of areas, including him being exhausted easily, movement problems, avoidance and increasing withdrawal, unpredictable and erratic behaviour, insomnia, cognitive problems, anxiety and depressive symptoms, personality changes, and some of Robin's colleagues had mentioned his morale was crumbling and Robin not being himself. Susan also mentioned delusional and paranoid thinking, including a belief she was not being faithful to him, which is not uncommon in some dementias. I think the sense that one is losing control makes this false belief a feature in the patient's own mind. If they are afraid and losing their sense of control, then they naturally want to cling harder and tighter to whatever they have, and often this is a spouse who then becomes the subject of jealousy, paranoid thoughts of infidelity and disloyalty. We now know that these symptoms were not related to Robin's earlier history of substance use or alcohol consumption, and were not a function of mental illness as was previously reported and speculated, but they were due to the horrible and debilitating disease we know as Lewy Body dementia. So let's briefly talk about what Lewy Body dementia is and what Robin may want us to take from his story. Lewy Body dementia occurs when the brain accumulates abnormal amounts of a protein, which have come to be called Lewy bodies, named after Dr. Friederich Lewy, a German neurologist back in 1912. These aggregations then affect the function of the brain, which leads to problems with thinking, movement, behaviour and mood. Lewy Body dementia is not as uncommon as some may think, and it affects over 1 million people in the US alone. Diagnosing Lewy Body dementia can be challenging, and sadly this seems to have happened with Robin. Early Lewy Body dementia symptoms are often confused with similar symptoms found in other brain diseases like Alzheimer's, like Parkinson's, or in some psychiatric disorders like schizophrenia or bipolar. Indeed, Robin's wife Susan recounts Robin asking his doctor if he had schizophrenia or bipolar. So, how did the doctors get it so wrong? Well, with Lewy Body dementia, It's actually an umbrella term for two related clinical diagnoses. So one of those is the Lewy Body dementia and the other is Parkinson's disease. Now these disorders share the same underlying changes in the brain and very similar symptoms, but the symptoms appear in a different order depending on where the Lewy bodies first form. So when there are motor deficits, so things like a tremor, bradykinesia, which is slowed movements, or rigidity, when these are preceding and are more severe than cognitive impairment, then Parkinson's disease dementia is usually diagnosed. However, when the early cognitive impairment, particularly executive dysfunction and behavioural disturbances predominate in the early stages, then dementia with Lewy bodies is usually diagnosed. So Robin was probably at least 3 years into his disease progression, and Lewy body dementia typically has a course of 5 to 8 years, so he was probably starting to notice the cognitive signs. Somehow he managed to hide that well. Maybe his acting skills came into play, but he hid this for a long time, as long as possible, I guess, until he couldn't. And I can only imagine how this may have impacted him and his reputation and identity as the world's funniest man. The director of his last movie, Night at the Museum 3, is on record saying Robin was struggling to remember his lines and was getting words mixed up a lot. He also said Robin would call him at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, worrying that he wasn't performing well enough and querying whether his scenes for the day were good enough. This tells me that Robin knew he was having cognitive problems, and the loss of control of one's body and mind can be unbearable. And unlike some other dementias, like frontotemporal dementia for instance, insight then can be well preserved. So Robin may have actually had insight. He may have been acutely aware he was losing elements of his personality, his mind, and this would have compounded his distress and ability to manage this then unknown condition. Now remember, Robin was only given the Parkinson's diagnosis months before his death, and it's possible this didn't make sense to him, especially when we know he was querying this diagnosis and asking the doctor. In the earlier stages, even the moderate stages of dementia, imaging, so CT scans or MRI scans, may not be diagnostic. This means the tiny cellular changes may not appear and be diagnosable, so doctors would then have to rely on the reported and observed behaviours and cognitive deficits to provide a best guess at what might be happening. Sometimes psychometrics can be helpful, and in my experience they're more helpful than imaging alone. So Robin's symptoms may have understandably looked like Parkinson's, and remember, he only got the Parkinson's diagnosis a few months before he took his life. But this was sadly the wrong diagnosis, and Robin was unable to deal with his rapidly changing mind and body. Robin's death certificate may say suicide, but it was certainly Lewy body's dementia that took Robin's life. Robin left this world without truly knowing what was happening to him, and I find this bittersweet. He died without knowing he had a degenerative brain disease that was slowly taking his life, slowly taking his humour and his characters from him, and slowly stealing a man from his wife and children. But he also left without the opportunity of knowing none of this was his doing, his fault. He didn't get to know it wasn't him that was broken. Dementia doesn't destroy the heart, and Robin didn't get the chance to know that. Robin often told people that he wanted to help people be less afraid, and I wonder if he was the one that became afraid in those last moments. Robin spent his life making us laugh, and I'm sure he wouldn't want his final memory to be one of sadness, but one of love, laughter, and gratitude.
Realize there are a lot of amazing people out there to be grateful for, and a loving God. And that, other than that, good luck.